It's a Fan Friday where I answer your questions on the Locked On Browns podcast, and one of them centers around whether or not the Bill Musgrave Deion Sanders connection is really that big of a deal. I'll answer that coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. The Bill Musgrave Deion Sanders connection is certainly interesting, but no, it does not telegraph what the Browns are going to do in the draft. Also, revisiting my list of biggest needs for the Browns, did I neglect a position on the defensive side of the ball? We'll talk about that. And 5 players to remember from the Senior Bowl this week that very well could be on the Browns' radar. I do want to thank you for being an everydayer with the Locked On Browns podcast and making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And I thought the timing of this question was interesting. I am going to do, especially during the offseason, something I'm going to call Fan Fridays, where you ask questions of me, largely via Twitter. I'm going to put it out there on social media. Have you guys make sure you follow me, and you can send in your questions, and I will try to bring them up and answer them on the show each Friday. And one of the biggest questions I got from the social media worlds, or social media spaces, I should say, was one that came in first from Nick on Blue Sky, who said, is there truly any reason to believe the Sanders and Musgrave connection can actually matter come draft time? I put little to no stock into it. And so I think there's a couple different avenues to that question specifically, because I do think on one hand, first of all, the NFL is a relationship business. This league centers so much around guys who know each other, relationships that you form over years of working together, or a time spent together as teammates, or whatever it might be. In the instance of Bill Musgrave and Deion Sanders, which, as I talked about in yesterday's show, they played together in San Francisco in the early 90s, won a Super Bowl together, and Deion has said one of his favorite Super Bowl memories was Bill getting a chance to play in that Super Bowl game as like the scout team quarterback, and he actually got a chance to suit up and play, which was kind of cool for him to experience with his friends. So like that stuff matters. Relationships matter. Guys who you cross paths. It's why you see these coaches get recycled oftentimes around the league, because, hey, it didn't work out one place. You keep in touch. Maybe in 2, 3, 4 years, you circle back and that guy has a new job and he's bringing you back on his staff because the relationship that you have. So I do think this stuff matters to a degree just in general. Like that's why I brought it up in the first place yesterday. And that's why I think it is being brought up in other spaces by people just pointing out that, yeah, they do have that connection, Deion Sanders and Bill Musgrave. Where I don't think it matters, and where I don't think like we should be drawing a direct line, is like this. Is this telling us what the Browns are going to do in April with the number 2 overall pick? No, that is the thing that we can't definitively say right now. This doesn't mean for sure that they're drafting Shedeur Sanders. It's interesting. But maybe there's I understand connecting the dots there, but we can't just draw that conclusion right now. So yeah, like I'm not willing to go there with it yet. But the reason why it's important, the one thing the main reason I think it is actually important though, is because of what we've heard so much this offseason about Deion Sanders and Shedeur Sanders, and whether or not they would even accept being drafted to Cleveland. If Deion would let his son come play here and actually suit up as a Cleveland Brown, when this organization hasn't been able to get the quarterback right for years for years and years, decades now, especially since the team returned in 1999. And so do you want to let your son play in, I don't know, the quarterback graveyard that has been Cleveland, 40 different quarterbacks since the team came back in 99 that have started a game for this franchise? I understand why there were some doubts there. And Andrew Berry addressed that this week. He said it's not something that he's worried about. He doesn't think it's going to be a problem. So that's it. That is reassuring. And I do think like the Bill Musgrave thing plays at least somewhat of a role in that. In like, okay, we don't think it's going to be a problem because we have somebody in the organization that Deion Sanders would trust to sort of nurture his son and take care of his son and make sure his son is going to be successful at the next level. And that's where I think it does matter a little bit. Again, it's not saying that they're going to draft Shedeur Sanders at number 2. Maybe it suggests that there is a little more interest there. I'm imagining that they're going to get insights from the coaching staff, Musgrave, Tommy Rees, who's talked a little bit about what he's looking for in a quarterback already this offseason. And ironically, it aligned perfectly with what Shedeur Sanders said is his best trait, which is being a good decision maker. And so, yeah, I think there's some interesting tea leaves that have been put out there in the first in the first month or so of the offseason that link the Browns to Shedeur Sanders. But no, this does not give us a finite answer as to, yes, they're drafting Shedeur Sanders because Bill Musgrave is their quarterback coach. But I do think the context of that matters when it comes to whether or not Deion Sanders is going to let his son play for the Cleveland Browns. If he's going to let him play for any organization, he wants to know the right people are there. He wants to know it's people he trusts to lead his son and help his son grow and develop at the next level. I would imagine Bill Musgrave falls into that category because of the relationship that they had from their playing days and the fact that they are close. I just think there's something to be said for that. So no, on the surface level, it does not tell us anything in the way of what the Browns are thinking or what the Browns are going to do. I would imagine they value Bill Musgrave as a quarterback. Here's a good way to look at it. You can't just make Bill Musgrave your quarterback coach if you don't think he's going to be a good quarterback coach for whoever your quarterback is going to be or whatever options might be out there, because you never know. There is a number of things that have to still happen before the Browns are actually end up with Shedeur Sanders if he ends up being the pick. The Titans have to pass on him. Maybe the Titans like Shedeur Sanders more. You have to get to the draft. You have to grade out this entire class. And if there's somebody you like more, maybe you wouldn't take that play. So you can't just make him the quarterback coach because you're like, well, this will help us get Shedeur. This will convince Deion Sanders that he should come here. I don't think that's what the Browns are doing here. I think they value Bill Musgrave as the quarterback coach and a guy that has obviously a lot of experience in this league, coaching that position and running offenses in this league. And so they are banking on him being a suitable person for the job, regardless of who the quarterback is. It just so happens he has a connection with one of the top quarterbacks in this year's class that could very much be in play for the Browns, but we don't know that yet. So I'm not drawing that line directly there yet. It may come to fruition, but I can't go there yet. But the thing that is important to remember when it comes to the Bill Musgrave, Deion Sanders connection is that as Deion, has openly said, there's certain places he doesn't want his son to end up or that they would sort of nix him going to. I think that having that built-in relationship does help the Browns' cause if they do end up drafting Shedeur Sanders, where they won't make a stink about it because they'll feel like he's in good hands. And that's where I think it does matter. So, yes, there's a little bit of column A and column B here where it's I don't think we should be reading into it so much that it's well, hey, they're signaling to everybody that they're drafting Shedeur Sanders. But I also don't think it's nothing, because those relationships in this league do matter so much. And it's the same thing we're doing with Tommy Rees and Jalen Milroe and the connection that they had. I don't know that they're going to take Milroe, and I know a lot of people have also tweeted me questions about Jalen Milroe, which I do want to talk about as I watch more of his tape as well. But we'll talk about those at a later time. But that was a first rendition of our Fan Fridays with questions from you, the fan. And I hope to get more of them in future weeks as well so that we can continue commenting on these things. Like I said, I got a lot about Jalen Milroe that I will address at another time. But coming up, I gave you yesterday my top 5 needs list for the Cleveland Browns. Did I neglect a key position on defense? I will let you know what position it is and whether or not I think it's a bigger need than I maybe let on. Coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Well, it was a glorious college football season for me because it ended with my Ohio State Buckeyes winning the national championship. And I got to say, I get to say I saw the Buckeyes in person. My wife and I actually went to the Michigan game. I know it was disappointing results, but it was a memory that we'll forever have because we got to say that we saw the eventual national championship team in person. And that was all thanks to Gametime. I'll tell you, my ticket buying experience went so smoothly with Gametime that it has now become my go-to app for buying tickets. Plus, they have a new feature called Gametime Picks, which makes it so much easier to get tickets to your favorite events by allowing you to filter out the fluff. Essentially, it shows you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time sorting through thousands and thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms may apply. Again, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app. What time is it? Game time? So in the theme of a Fan Friday, I also got a tweet sent to me after I posted my episode yesterday with my top 5 needs list for the Cleveland Browns this offseason. And for those who maybe missed it, I would encourage you to go back and listen, but I'll give you it here, the Spark Notes version of it. It was quarterback at 1, obviously, left tackle at 2, defensive end at 3, running back at 4, wide receiver at 5. And I had somebody message me when they saw the list that I put out and suggest that I was crazy for, I shouldn't say crazy. That's a little hype. That's hyperbole on my part, but I'll just read you the message. You said top needs. You mentioned quarterback and then 5 positions where we have starters, but completely ignore free safety. Juan Thornhill is gone. 0 deep center fielders with range on this roster. Explain yourself, sir. And listen, I think that's a fair point because I do agree. And I think I did this earlier in the offseason where I listed 5 guys that could be cap casualties or 5 guys that I think they could part ways with that are still in a contract on this team right now. And so that very much could end up being still true. I think Thornhill is probably on the outs here in Cleveland. I just think it's run its course. He had the hustle, his hustle was called into question in that Saints game. And there's been other moments throughout his career where he hasn't necessarily looked like he was giving his best efforts. He's been injured quite a bit. And Andrew Berry has continued to just miss on signing free agent safeties for whatever reason during the offseason. But I think it's probably time those two part ways and they look elsewhere at that position specifically. So we'll see if that does come to fruition. I'm envisioning that it does. But knowing that Juan Thornhill's probably gone, yes, I think safety does become a need for this team. But here's what I'll say. I don't know that tweaks my ranking anymore. I think safety is important. I think safety is going to end up being something that they're going to have to address in some capacity, assuming Juan Thornhill is on the outs. But I don't know that as I think about the way teams win in the NFL today and the way that this Browns team is currently made up, I don't know that I sit there and think I'm not stressing over needing a safety. And what it's not because I don't think it's important. I do think on some level safety value has gone down in recent years. Like Jamal Adams was a guy coming out that was drafted fairly highly and ends up becoming like a journeyman, bouncing around and not really contribute. And I'm not saying there's no good safeties in the NFL. I just think that position used to matter a lot more in a different era of football. You think about the greats, so like your Brian Dawkins, your Troy Polamalu's, your Ed Reeds, like guys that could do a lot of those different things and play different roles. And I'm not saying those guys don't still exist and that it's not an important part, but I don't know that it matters as much as it used to in a defensive setup, especially a defense like Jim Schwartz, where, yeah, you need guys that can cover, but I think the Browns kind of take care of that with the corners that they have. And I'm assuming, I guess, here that Greg Newsome is back in some capacity next year, so they still have kind of their top 3 guys in those roles. And so as I think about like what the safety position looks like for this team, to me, it honestly feels like they'd be more inclined to move on from Juan Thornhill and, invest maybe a lesser in that position, whether it's signing a guy at a free agency at a lesser deal or drafting somebody in a later round and hoping that it turns into something, and just using somebody like Ronnie Hickman or DeAnthony Bell as a starter opposite of Grant Delpit on the back end of that defense. And the reason I feel that way is because like they've kind of been developing those guys behind the scenes to become starting caliber players anyway. And they've gotten a lot of runtime because, let's face it, I mean, like Juan Thornhill's been hurt quite a bit. Rodney McLeod the year before that was hurt. And you do throw Rodney's name into the mix here because he was a guy that was also there to help sort of bolster the safety position for you. And now he's also gone. So it's not that I don't think safety is a need. You lost 2 guys, or you lost 1 guy for sure who's retiring in McLeod. You are likely to lose another one via just roster management and going in a different direction in Juan Thornhill. And so it is a need, but is it a top 5 need for this team? I still argue no. I think the defense is good enough in other areas that even if there's a safety spot that's a little bit vulnerable or maybe not as tested as you would like, they can be okay. I do think Grant at this point has sort of shown that he is more of that down in the box style guy who's going to stop, fly up and try to make plays in the run game. And his coverage skills are okay. Like he's fine. He's not great. So yeah, having somebody back there who has more range, as the guy who tweeted me alluded to, that deep center field type player is still something that's important. But I don't know that I'm like stressing over it so much that it still cracks my top 5. I don't even know if it cracks my honorable mention of tight end being a need for this team. Maybe it would be in that conversation, though. I'd have to rethink about that. But I don't think it cracks my top 5 still, because I think the top 5 I put out there makes a lot of sense. And I know a lot of those needs are on offense, and rightfully so. This offense was a disaster this past year. But a lot of it, too, is like, especially if you're drafting a quarterback, you got to start putting this offense in a position moving forward to be successful and kind of grow together. Like, think about it. If you draft a quarterback, you want a left tackle to sort of pair with that quarterback so they can develop and grow together at the same time. And they already have solidified those two positions all kind of at once. That would be a nice luxury for a team like the Browns to be able to have. Same sort of thing applies to a new wide receiver to pair with Jerry Jeudy and work with a new rookie quarterback. Like, you'd have a lot of shiny new toys and things to give you hope for the future on that side of the ball. And I think the defense, I know they took a step back this year. Some of that was the offense was so putrid that they were on the field quite a bit. But I still think the defense, like overarching wise, like they're still a solid group and they still did some really nice things this year. And I think they were still a solid unit that just kind of got themselves in trouble because the offense was bad. There was a lot of turnovers on the offensive side of the ball. They were given short fields a lot of the time to defend, and that didn't really work out for them. So I don't put a lot of the woes or faults of this past season on the defense, on the defensive side of things. I think that group is still pretty solid. And if you lose a safety like Juan Thornhill, and you have a little bit of a hole to fill, I don't recall feeling like Ronnie Hickman and DeAnthony Bell did so poorly or anything that they couldn't hold it down for a whole season. And those are two guys that the organization feels really good about and really values as well. So I do think there's something to going with that route. And let's just face it. Like, here's the other part of this. You can't fill every need in one off season. It's just impossible to do. You can try, you can sign a guy and still say like, we feel good about this. Like, I'm not saying they're going to like neglect it completely. I'm imagining they're going to sign somebody or draft somebody. But it's hard to like fill every need in one off season with like a notable top flight player or something like that. Like you got to kind of take this thing one step at a time. So can you bridge safety as a position? I feel like you can kind of bridge the gap with and get to next year before you really emphasize like finding the next star player at that position or something like that you need for your defense. So it's just lower on the list for me. But I do appreciate the comment there. And I do think that is a position that we should be talking about more, whether or not the Browns need or what the Browns are going to do at safety, especially once we get more information on what their plans are for Juan Thornhill, which, as I said, I would imagine he is not back with the Browns in 2025. Speaking of players that the Browns could draft to fill some of these needs, 5 Senior Bowl standouts that I think you need to keep in mind as the Browns continue their march towards the draft. Players that could be fits for this team in a number of different key roles, some of which I talked about in my needs list yesterday on the podcast. We will get into that coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections. And if you're right, you can win 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game. It's Patrick Mahomes. He just needs to throw for 1 yard for you to win. Pair that with another pick, and you could be cashing out big. Leading up to the game, I'm already looking at Travis Kelce, more receiving yards to maybe pair with that free box. And don't forget to take advantage of the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can split $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play a $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, so the majority of the Senior Bowl is winding down this week. The game is obviously on Saturday. People, I think, care less about the game and more so about the practices leading up to the game throughout the week. And there was plenty of things discussed and said and talked about prospects that were down there participating in those practices. And so I got 5 guys at positions that are important to the Browns this offseason to continue to watch or keep an eye on or think about as being links for the Browns or good fits for the Browns as the offseason here continues. I will go 5-1, opposite of what we did with the needs list yesterday. And I will start with linebacker Jeffrey Bassa out of Oregon. Bassa was he was a senior this year with the Ducks. And I think linebacker is another one of those needs along with safety that we talked about. That's probably like just on the outside looking into the top 5. And it maybe becomes a bigger need depending on what the future holds with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Now, the organization might have a better sense of what his future holds than we do on the outside looking in. But the reason I think Boss is a good fit is, first of all, he's an outside linebacker. And one of the things that was raved about from the Senior Bowl this week was that he has this innate leadership ability. Like, he was pointing guys in the right directions, calling things out, being very vocal. Browns could use a guy like that on the defense. And he's got some pretty solid man-to-man coverage skills as a linebacker in the middle of that defense there. So 2 things that I think the Browns value immensely, the leadership portion of it and the ability to cover in space. You know, the Browns play a ton of man. So having somebody like that would be beneficial. And so I'm intrigued by how his stock sort of rises or rose after this game. And obviously it concludes on Saturday with the actual game itself. He's projected right now as a day 2 pick. Browns have a number of picks on day 2. They have 2 third-rounders. They have the second rounder. Maybe they add more at some point here, depending on what type of trade they could make with the number 2 pick overall. We'll see. But I do like Bassa as a guy to keep an eye on if you're a Browns fan. Also, number 4 on my list, Xavier Restrepo, wide receiver out of Miami. He's not necessarily a guy that made a name for himself at the Senior Bowl because he already was kind of known leading up to this. Like, he was one of the best receivers in college football this year, put up massive numbers, Miami's all-time leading receiver when it was all said and done. And the things that stand out about him, he's a great route runner, elite route runner already. He's got this savviness to his game. There was a highlight going around where he was running kind of like a crossing route, and he dipped a little bit further back because he saw there was nobody back there in coverage in the back of the end zone, and the quarterback threw the ball right to him. It was kind of a savvy veteran move to get himself some space to get open, and the quarterback saw it and, makes the connection for the touchdown. And the reason I like him, he's undersized, and that's the reason why he's kind of projected as like a third-round guy potentially. But I think that's some good value for the Browns potentially if they were to take him. And the reason I think he's also a fit, Browns really could use a slot guy to pair with Jerry Jeudy, who I think proved obvious this season that he can be your number 1 wide receiver. And so if you could get an every down slot guy like Restrepo, and I know Jerry Jeudy did some stuff out of the slot as well, but if you can get an every down slot guy in Restrepo and pair him with Jerry Jeudy, I think that's a pretty deadly combination. I like the sound of that. And I think you should keep your eyes on Restrepo throughout the rest of this draft process. Here's another position of need from yesterday. Number 3 on my list, offensive tackle Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. The big asset that he brings to the table is that he can play pretty much anywhere on the offensive line. And reports out of Mobile, are that he was trying his hand at center as well and did a pretty good job. He had already done some guard stuff. He had already done some tackle stuff. Teams felt good about him in either one of those positions. And now he can be a center as well. Like, that screams, versatility on the offensive line is a massive trait that people look for and that teams and scouting departments look for. And if they know they have a guy that can play anywhere on the offensive line, that is such an asset and a valuable thing for any player to have entering the NFL. So keep an eye on that name as well. Right now, I think he has some first-round buzz associated with him, so we'll see if he ends up even being available, especially now that his stock might be on the rise. But still a name to keep in mind if the Browns do want to find a tackle to maybe pair with a rookie quarterback that they could take at number 2. Going back to the Miami for my second player here, Elijah Arroyo, tight end from Miami. And this tight end group has some interesting names. There's the kid from Bowling Green, whose name is escaping me right now. It's going to come to me and I'm going to be so mad. Harold Fannin Jr. I think. Yeah. Harold Fannin Jr. Who's maybe top of the class. We know about Tyler Warren out of Penn State, who's going to be a notable name from this group. But Elijah Arroyo, I think, has seen himself kind of gain some. His stock has gone up, and the Senior Bowl helped that cause. He's a really refined route runner, I think, is something that people are noticing. And he showed he can block a little bit. And as I said yesterday, why tight end was my honorable mention position on the Browns' top 5 needs had to do a lot with the fact that you're going back to Kevin Stefanski's offense. He likes to run multiple tight end sets. You need tight ends that can block, and he seemed to show at the Senior Bowl that he can block fairly well as well. So I like the idea of maybe Arroyo being in play for Cleveland at some point. Right now, he was just I think Daniel Jeremiah had him like just outside his top 50 players, and now he's getting some like first round buzz. So maybe that's a guy you get in the second round. I'm talking about multiple guys that could be available second or third round. So we'll see, but keep an eye on him. And my number 1 position is actually a guy who's not going to play in the game anymore. It's defensive end Mike Green Jr. out of Marshall, who I watched when he played the Buckeyes pretty closely earlier this season, and I knew about him coming in. Really, really good player. And he's already got some really nice moves to his game in terms of like being able to elude opposing offensive linemen. He's got a spin move. He's got a chop going. He's got some other things in his arsenal that he can deploy. And so I'm intrigued by Mike Green. He had maybe the clip of the week where he absolutely just blew up Josh Connerly Jr. and knocked him on his ass during a one-on-one drill that had everybody talking. And so the one thing with him is, like, I think people want to see him bulk up a little bit more. They want to see him add some muscle at the next level, but that's an easy thing to do. That's an easy thing to add in the pros. There's still probably some room for him to develop, but again, you leave room for that at the NFL level when coaches really get their hands on him and can mold him even more. I don't know that he's probably like 6th or 7th best defensive lineman in this class, I'd say, right now. But maybe he rises some more after his Senior Bowl performance and gives himself, an even higher value. But I think he could be another player in play for the Browns second round, maybe third round. I don't think he gets that far. But again, Browns have an opportunity to trade back up into that second round if he falls a little bit, because they're going to be picking pretty early in the third round as well. So I don't know. These are all options. And I will say this with Mike Green Jr. He withdrew from the game itself after his great week and went to go train for the draft elsewhere. So I think, like, certainly realizing that his stock is on the rise and trying to take advantage of that. And we'll see him next, I would imagine, at the Combine and what he brings to the table through some of those drills. But that is my list of top 5 Senior Bowl standouts to keep in mind if you're a Browns fan as the draft gets closer and closer and we hear the Browns start to figure out potential guys that they like to fill some of the biggest needs on their roster. That's going to do it, though, for another episode of the Locked On Browns podcast with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me, as always, to talk about your favorite football team. There'll be plenty more to come in the weeks and months ahead, so stay tuned and continue to make us your first listen every single day. For your second listen, check out one of the new Locked On NFL shows, or if you want to keep it local, check out Locked On Cavs, Locked On Guardians. Thanks for being in every day at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. In the meantime, peace.